This is the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.
Yeah, anyway, my old dog is getting old, and I don't know. She's a great dog, but it's just a bummer because you see all these spry dogs running around doing dog stuff. My dog does the quintessential dog stuff. She sleeps. She sleeps and she sleeps. She does it very, very well. Yeah, running and jumping, let alone guarding the house stuff. Not so good. So you know this, right? You know this big thing of dogs. You learn it from Plato, but you learn it from just life. Dogs should be good to friends and harmful to enemies. This dog has never been that. You don't get a lab golden retriever mix and expect it to be anything but a friend to the world. And that's exactly what she is. So I think I'm going to try and go the whole other direction next time and just get some straight mean dog. Since this dog is a friend to everyone, maybe I should try and do some balance by getting a dog that's an enemy to everyone, including me.
I'm happy to recommend. As a kid, we had 2 Chihuahuas. And they were mean, nasty, ugly, yappy. They bite anything that moved. And they really had no loyalty. We had 2 of them, Pedro and Margot. We got them when I was about 4. And they never got kind.
I was sitting here thinking of some dog that could murder me as what I should get. And you've shown me, no, you can get a really bad dog or a dog that's harmful to everyone and live with it so long as it doesn't weigh over 4 pounds.
Right, just mildly annoying. For 17 to 18 years.
I can see by the way you're putting hand on your forehead that they were not mildly annoying. I don't hear, yeah, it was a minor inconvenience. You know, the sun was in my eye and then I pulled the shade down. That's not what you're talking about right now.
Well, this is the thing with pets, right? You have made an obligation to them. You've purchased them. You brought them into your home. You do form attachments to them, even if they are yappy, mean Chihuahuas. You're stuck with them. You can't get rid of them. They may grow more mellow. They may grow slower. You may be able to outrun them. Their bark may grow quieter, but they don't reform. You can't make them better by reading Jane Austen to them or something.
So who always said these dogs are the worst and who always defended them in the home?
My mother will defend anything that needs her, including me. Including my brother. I guess I was the main critic. I never really made an effort to befriend them. Of course, when they passed, it was a wreck around here. One of them went the natural way, the sweeter of the 2 of them, and died one morning in my mother's arms. The second one day, went out for a walk, and my dad went to follow him maybe 15 seconds later after letting him outside, and he was gone. Now, probably picked up by a fox or a bird or something like that, because you have a tiny Chihuahua at the age of 18. He's not putting up a fight against anything, but that was it.
I'm sorry to hear this. I'm sorry. I mean this sincerely. Sorry for your loss. I imagine your dad felt terrible that happened on his watch.
Yeah, he felt terrible and that he let the dog go in advance of him by about 15 seconds. But I did get a moment of perspective today. I was taking my cat to the vet, sitting in the waiting room near an examination room, and the door opened, and I see people walking out weeping, and they had no pet with them.
And Aaron.
I know. No fun.
What's up, dude? I'm letting up here. I mean, them's the facts, though. And I think if you don't accept the facts, you can't try to remedy them. If you don't accept the facts that these things will happen, you actually don't know what to do when they happen. And this is going to be my segue, what you just handed me, for better or for worse. The fact that Publius wants us to accept is that faction is sown into the very hearts of men. This is a fact of life that we are factious beings. I was thinking you were going to set me up to make some cats and dogs joke and how to make them come together. Instead, you just kept getting darker and darker. But that's right. But Publius, in this sort of realpolitik aspect of Publius, is after we've come off of Federalist paper number 9, where we studied and admitted the beauty of the petty republics of antiquity and also the horror of the petty republics in antiquity, come to the point in Fed 10 where we are ready to consider, as he says in the opening words, a well-constructed union. And we are ready to consider and investigate a well-constructed union because we've accepted the facts of Republican government from the past and are open to the possibilities that Publius's improved political science with the 5 improvements we discussed last meeting, I'll repeat them right now: separation of powers, legislative checks and balances, by which he means bicameralism, representative government, judges who serve during good behavior, which means tenure, and then finally, the enlargement of the sphere. Now that we're ready for these improvements, we're ready for a well-constructed union. Notice Fed 10's title. Federalist paper number 10 is entitled "The Same Subject Continued." Not too attractive of a title until we go back to Fed 9 and see the utility of the union as a safeguard against domestic factions and insurrection. We're going to talk about a well-constructed union in Federalist paper number 10. And to do so, we need to understand the facts of faction, the depths of the challenge. So I think we should pay attention. It's a little unorthodox, but I think we should really pay attention to paragraph 1 before racing to paragraph 2, as sometimes I will do.
A well-constructed union. The same subject continued. We looked at our 5 improvements. Should we take the union to be well-constructed because it has those 5? Are we looking at something different, something specific? We've had other adjectives applied to union: firm union, disunion. Why is the union well-constructed? Is it those 5?
We don't know yet. When it comes to these sort of questions, I try not to load the dice and admit that I know how the movie's going to end. But what I can at least say by way of the sentence you read is that a well-constructed union, properly defined by sentence 1 of Federalist paper number 10, is that which is capable of breaking and controlling the violence of faction. Those need to be paid attention to as well. Breaking faction, controlling faction. We've got to break it. How are we going to break it? We've got to control it. I have some sense of how we are going to control it. We saw those 5 improvements in Federalist paper number 9. You and I also know that we're going to see 2 of those improvements at work in Federalist paper number 10. The enlargement of the sphere is the first that I would like to talk about now. What's interesting about the enlargement of the sphere is it's not clear to me that that alone makes a well-constructed union, because as you alluded to, we've been talking about union this whole time, overtly since Fed 3 through Fed 8. So why is it now called well-constructed? Is there any other ingredient of those 5 improvements listed in Fed 9 that's at work now? So to cheat a little and admit that we both know what's going to happen, I must wonder, is a well-constructed union that which is capable of breaking and controlling violence and faction? Yes, that's what he says in first sentence. And then what are the qualities of that union that make it capable of doing so? It's big. Yes. Second, it contains representation. Well-constructed union is going to accompany our understanding of Republican government as fashioned by Publius in Fed 10. Now we're going to define Republican government anew as containing those 2 qualities I've announced: representation, not direct democracy, and an enlarged sphere. So I apologize for speaking so long. I got a little excited about unpacking this sentence. The answer should have just been, I don't know, because Publius is only 1 sentence in. Let's see what he says. But that's my hunch. So what I should now do is test it.
Faction. Faction is the concern of this paper. It is the problem that the solution of representation and an extended sphere will be aimed at. Before we get to the causes, looking ahead, we do have to talk about why faction is such a problem for the Union. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. So faction is a vice, and it should alarm friends of popular governments. Not only for the government's character, what kind of popular government it will be, but also for its fate. Because as he says afterwards, the instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished. It is, to use a modern word, an existential problem for popular governments. The republics of Greece and Italy perished under these mortal diseases.
This is great, the words that you're really drawing to my attention, because we move from, look, the violence of faction is that with which we must deal, sentence 1. And then we move to a singular friend of popular governments in sentence 2, who is alarmed, as you've said, to the character and fate of popular government. The issue here could not be more alive. Is popular government destined to suffer this violence, this vice? Is it possible to maintain your attachment to popular government and cure this vice, this disease? Because that's the issue. Like, if you want to get rid of faction, and I can say this from the previous paper, I don't even have to think about Fed 10. From Fed 9, I can say, if you want to get rid of faction, just get a king. Just remove the people from the equation. This is a malady that truly afflicts popular government. So as a friend of popular government, what am I to do? Well, the friend of popular government has another friend named Publius, and he's going to tell him what he can do here in a second. He's going to help us overcome instability, injustice, and confusion in the public councils. The valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired, but it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected. I'm just going to stop there. All the $5 words in that sentence warrant stopping.
I see Publius looking back into the history of the 1770s and the 1780s after the state constitutions were ratified following the Declaration of Independence, and seeing that these institutions weren't able to produce legislatures tending toward the public good, that partiality, landed interest was able to dominate, and instability really made friends of popular government more leery of it. There's a problem in America. There's good reason, Publius suggests, to be skeptical about popular government. I mean, he's not simply addressing this line of argument to skeptics of popular government just because he wants to then tear it down. There are people who have looked at the chaos of America in the 1770s and the 1780s and wondered, men govern ourselves. To look back to Federalist 1.
This is always a live question. I appreciate you reminding me of that. Is self-government possible? Notice also in this sentence I read to you, Publius admits that the American constitutions, and just to be clear, he means the state constitutions. The state constitutions have made valuable improvements. So Publius offered us improvements back in Fed 9. And now he's admitting, hey, I'm not the only person in this improvement business. The state constitutions have made valuable improvements. But you see where I'm pointing with this, Aaron. What improvement can they not make? Union. A state can't make the improvement in popular government of existing in this extended sphere as far as its state constitution goes. So they can come up with the scheme of representation all day long, but they can't come up with the extended sphere. Publius can have both through the proposed constitution. I love the rhetoric of this sentence as well. The valuable improvements made by the American Constitution on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired. What a sweetheart. You can admire them. You'll never run out of admiration. No one is ever going to say, man, you're over-admiring Virginia, no matter what Jefferson may say about its constitution. And then he goes on to say, after a semicolon, but it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have effectually obviated the danger on this side, as was wished and expected, on the side of faction. They have not effectively obviated the danger regarding the violence of faction, the instability, injustice, and confusion that's introduced into their public councils. They have not obviated that danger. It would be an unwarrantable partiality to move from your admiration of the state constitutions at this time into saying everything's hunky-dory. Partiality here, he is priming the pump and just barely admitting partiality is at the heart of the problem of faction. So you have to be careful. Don't be too partial. While at the same time, very soon he's going to admit to us that you can't do away with partiality. But there's such a thing now that you and I can see as unwarrantable partiality, as he admits in this sentence I've studied, and I can infer warrantable partiality, unwarrantable and warrantable. When's it okay to be partial? If I already really turning the screws on this sentence, can't help but notice the rhetorical flair of it all, that we are knee deep in a seductor's lair. Because he's saying, your state constitutions are really great. I admire them all day long. Look at all the improvements. Look at all the good things you did. But don't think about them with unwarrantable partiality. Come over here to my side, because I'm about to offer you some improvements that are real improvements. Come over here and be partial. Be partial to the Constitution. Be partial to the Federalists' cause and understanding of good government after you understand a well-constructed union.
Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith, and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and that measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. So if government by speech and reason is meant to take force out of politics, look what Publius says has happened. Which parties are winning? Simply the larger ones and the more interested ones. Interested and overbearing majorities deciding whatever they want in conflict to the rights of minorities. In the meantime, because they are interested, they are disregarding the public good. And again, to return to the first item, that our governments are too unstable.
Now, this really reminds us, in case I misspoke and was going too quickly in the previous sentence, Publius doesn't admire the state constitutions themselves. He admires the improvements. And now the criticism is here in the sentence you just read to us. These state constitutions that have improvements that cannot be too much admired actually are not good constitutions, because they're the laws of states wherein there is tremendous injustice and instability. And let's just talk about that minority and majority here. We just mean numerical. So the numerical minority is getting just run over by the numerical majority. No matter the issue, there is nothing in these state constitutions to safeguard against a majority. We can see here that a majority will go over the rights of others, will go over the rules of justice.
Is it too simple to say, one, this is bad government he's describing, and two, a good constitution cannot produce bad government, or will not, in most cases, produce bad government?
Why don't you like binaries? What's wrong? Is the world too complicated to admit binaries like this? Yeah, I mean, at least what Publius needs to offer us in the education regarding government and the Constitution itself, it can probably make great leaps forward if we have no problem with this 1 and 0 thinking. Good government, justice. Bad government, injustice. Good government protects rights no matter if you're a minority party or a majority party. Bad government doesn't protect your rights if you're a minority party.
Well, simply to say that the other forces that might produce good government, such as a virtuous citizenry, which I'm not sure Federalist 10 is an endorsement of American virtue, but a virtuous citizenry, a government that is bound by other means, such as a Bill of Rights, to respect rights. And I know the Constitution doesn't come with a Bill of Rights, but the states had them. That actually it's the innovations mentioned in Federalist number 9, most of which are what we would call institutional arrangements, like a bicameral legislature or a judiciary. The enlargement of the orbit is a different kind of institutional arrangement, that actually to have good government, you need good institutions. And specifically, right, these ones that he defends.
I think maybe I didn't appreciate the seriousness of your question, Aaron, excuse me. Publius is loading the dice in his own favor. At the beginning of the sentence you read to us, complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens. So these complaints are the complaints of considerate and virtuous citizens, meaning that's what they care about. Considerate and virtuous citizens, friends of public and private faith, and of public and personal liberty. What are they concerned with? Stability, the public good, justice, and rights. So they're already of a certain character, these considerate and virtuous citizens, and they're just looking to the institutions, the laws under which they live, and seeing whether they can or cannot secure what I'm just going to simply call the public good at this point. So he's not worried about this whole, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but it doesn't seem to me that he's worried about this whole capacity of the aristoi, the virtuous, and the way that the character is developed. Even though I would argue that not only the whole of the Federalist Papers contain something of character development, of a civic education that is meant to nurture a certain sort of character, Fed 10 does, by all means, contain this.
And there are worse consequences too. This mortal disease has other symptoms. Moving toward the end of the paragraph, the prevailing and increasing, notice it will only get worse, distrust of public engagements and alarm for private rights, which are echoed from one end of the continent to the other. So it doesn't matter if you have the government that Pennsylvania has or that Rhode Island has or that Georgia has. From one end of the continent to the other, people are raising the alarm for private rights, by which I think he means minority rights and rights of property, and are becoming increasingly distrustful or decreasingly trustful of the public sphere.
It's amazing that this is not outlined in Fed 1.
Yeah.
But I don't think we were ready to understand this in Fed 1. I think we needed to move through the necessity of union to get to this point. The necessity of union as Publius understands it, because it's not as if there wasn't a union in America, but the union, an adequate union. Now we're ready for a well-constructed union. But a full experience of the insufficiency of the existing federal government is what's discussed in the opening sentence of Fed 1.
Yes.
Well, so why didn't he say you should have alarm for your private rights? Everybody's talking about this. It's a remarkable shift here.
So you're arguing because we needed to become attached to the union as much as we are attached to our own state governments, only then attached to a well-constructed union, not the subsisting federal government, right? We don't like that anymore. Once we become attached to a well-constructed, a firm union, a proper union, then we're ready to look in the mirror and criticize our own Maryland or our own Georgia.
Foremost, it wouldn't be a smart move to come out just going, man, that Virginia Constitution. It does make a lot more sense to come out and just attack the articles, the thing you're there to attack. But now we can realize the depth of that attack, because the insufficiency of the articles is exacerbated by way of the insufficiency or shortcomings of the state constitutions. And I'm now prepared to hear that, because I've gone through this grand tour of all of the problems of disunion and the necessity of union. And now we're moving up. Now it's safety for public good. It's safety for justice and rights, not just mere physical safety. And as you pointed out at the end of paragraph 1, private rights, everybody's saying this. The friend of popular governments is concerned about salvaging popular government and making sure that it's not going to die from this vicious disease that is faction. And Publius diagnoses us and say, man, you already have this in all of your state governments, and also because you have a weak Articles of Confederation that are incapable of solving it. And they're incapable of solving this disease or curing this disease, because there's not a well-constructed union brought about by way of the Articles of Confederation. Keep your state constitution. There's improvements in there I admire. ratify the Constitution, though, that we're pitching to.
And even if we haven't read the remainder of this paper and the papers that follow, we've probably read the Constitution that's proposed, surely that appeared in the same newspaper in which we're reading the Federalist, and we can read Article 1, Section 9 and see the limitations that the Constitution places on the state governments. We're not discussing those yet. Publius is going to softly, we may not even notice it, depending how carefully or how quickly we're reading. If you want to take a half hour on paragraph 1, you may notice this. We're not going to discuss yet the ways in which this Constitution is going to limit the powers of the states. That's going to come later. Even now, it takes us up to here to be able to criticize our own political institutions. Later, we may even be willing to admit to the need of limiting our own sovereign states.
Take notice now of the last sentence in paragraph 1. These must be chiefly, if not wholly, effects of the unsteadiness and injustice with which a factious spirit has tainted our public administrations. We're in dire straits. It's bad out here. Unsteadiness and injustice. You know what that sounds like? The petty republics of antiquity to which I was introduced in Fed 9. How are we going to be any different? 5 improvements. Now we're going to see 2 of them at work in Fed 10. But the first thing that we need to do is make sure we're clear about what faction is. Because if we misunderstand faction, how could we possibly cure it? If I misdiagnose it, how could I possibly cure it? Is it okay to move to paragraph 2 now, Aaron?
Yeah, let's do it. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community.
So is us getting together to watch LSU have a tough football season yet again a faction? Is us getting together to read the Federalist Papers a faction? No. Even when we say go to hell, Ole Miss, go to hell, which is what we would say at an LSU football game, that's not a faction, because everybody knows that LSU fans are the best and they're kind and they'll share their goods with any of the rival teams except Alabama. And so therefore, that a faction does not make. A group of people coming together over some shared interest or passion does not a faction make. Be clear of the standard that changes any assembly of people from a mere assembly of people into a faction, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. It could be the 2 of us, Aaron. It could be all of us, everyone you and I know. It doesn't matter, minority or majority can form a faction. It doesn't matter if we're assembled because of a common impulse of passion or of an interest. None of that really matters to me. The effectual truth of faction, as far as I'm concerned, if I can just profess it, is you're acting against my rights, or you're acting against the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. Publius says, I understand. Let's see if we understand. I'm convinced, to be sure. But what's going to follow in Fed 10 is whether we agree. And once we share that diagnosis of the disease of faction, we can also assess the viability or goodness of the way that he attempts to deal with the disease.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
It's impious, and I don't think you're going to like it. Are the Federalists a faction?
Well, what rights are they acting against? And what permanent and aggregate interests are they acting against?
So if I'm a Virginian and I like my Constitution, or a New Yorker, and I don't want to see its power limited,
Just vote no. But they're not compelling you to. They're not forcing anyone to do anything and cloaking themselves in the legitimacy of majoritarian rule. So that's where you, with your spurs and your livery as a Virginian, are misunderstanding unjust majoritarian rule with a person who's inviting you to deliberate and choose. Now, you would say, well, what they did in Philly was not something we told them to do. Yeah, sure. In Philly, they did something you told them not to do. And then after they did that work, they told you, think about what we did and see if you like it and want to live by it. So you might be mad that they wasted you bought all those dinners at the pub for them, but that's between them and HR. But when it comes down to them being a faction, not at this point. I'd love to be wrong about this, but I don't see how.
It's not simply a matter of perspective, right? I think my rights are violated. I think that they're acting against the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. It comes down in your formulation to whether they are forcing it down my throats or they're attempting to persuade a majority, and a wide majority of the citizens, that they are in the right. If I'm on the losing side, then I vote no, and that's just the game.
That's just the game. And you go back to England. It's a bummer, but otherwise, if you don't have majoritarian rule, you, like Locke says of Cato in the second treatise, will simply go into theater only to exit again. So you have to have majoritarianism or super majoritarianism. What you need to stave off or dampen the possibility of happening is that a majority decides to enslave minority, as per Stephen A. Douglas, all that Kansas-Nebraska Act evil, where he said that the right of popular sovereignty, and it became law in America, that the right of popular sovereignty allowed a majority to decide to enslave a group. I mean, that's obviously a faction. I mean, that obviously is against our rights. And there's a reason I use the word evil. It's unjust, to be sure. That's my understanding here. Publius hasn't even adumbrated what our rights are. I mean, they're just known to us, it seems. It seems as if they're in the air, or the American mind here. What's a permanent and aggregate interest? Rights, we can worry about what they are, the emanations that are rights. I'm going to go with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and also consenting to be governed, and also the right to revolution. That's how I read the Declaration of Independence. But permanent and aggregate interests, man, permanent interests. My opinions change. My interests change like the weather. Aggregate interests? We have interests on the whole, all of us? What could those possibly be?
He's just spent quite a lot of time convincing us it's union.
I think you are spot on. Because we are here in this place, this terra, this space, not merely place, but you see what I mean. Place, space, terra. A permanent interest of any inhabitants of this joint, if Publius is right about political science and the nature of human beings. A permanent and aggregate interest, because it's everybody's, is union. And it's not merely union. Now it's going to be a well-constructed union, as was said in a very fancy way in Fed paper number 9, enlargement of the orbit. That's a permanent and aggregate interest. I think you're spot on with that assessment. I would go a step further. It's too early to say this right now, but because I know what else is going to happen, I would add in to this equation the other improvements Publius offers us. Why is not a representative scheme of government in our permanent and aggregate interests? Why is not bicameralism? Why is not tenure for judges during good behavior? Here's really what I think Publius thinks is in our permanent and aggregate interest: separation of power. That really is the rub, in my opinion. Because what else is permanent and what else is aggregate that Publius has been concerned about this whole time? You and me, our nature, the nature of man, all that hard-nosed realism that we've been seeing throughout these single-digit papers. Does Publius think that's going to change? All of a sudden, human beings aren't going to be the human beings that he's been studying throughout human history? He might have to admit that new improvements would come about. New improvements in political science that would deal with the problems differently. Maybe Publius would be, sure, why wouldn't he be so sober as to admit, yeah, you guys might figure out some stuff I didn't figure out. But for now and for the rhetorical project, why not see separation of powers, bicameralism, representative government, separate judiciary serving during good behavior, and the enlargement of the orbit? So a faction is anybody who wants to take away the separation of powers, who's like, these bums on the Supreme Court, because now they're trying to take away another one of the improvements. These bums on the Supreme Court should be censurable by the House. I would say, yo, are y'all trying to be a faction over there? I don't know. I don't mean to get too contemporary, but Publius might ask us to consider such things.
Note the short term, the impulse of a faction in the House of Representatives, right? They can act on it by a simple majority vote, making a irreversible or at least a change or a motion with long-term damage against a political institution which should be permanent in its character. The impulsiveness is something there as well.
Yeah, we should pay attention to that. I really appreciate you pointing this out. A common impulse of passion. That's typically the way passion afflicts us, is it not?
In the mob, we're talking about mobs, right? A mob can be in the House of Representatives. You mentioned the Virginia Constitution, and that's Jefferson's complaint, right? 85 tyrants or whatever it is.
This is a great point that you're showing me now. Let's pay attention to a common impulse of passion or an interest and see how Publius deals with those as we proceed. But that is the way that passion hits us. This is an impulse. It just comes because it's not well-reasoned passion that we would worry about when we're worried about depriving other people of their rights. At that point, you would say, well, it's reasonable for me to deprive you of your rights. You're a 4-year-old child.
Right.
You can't do these things.
It's
not a. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I can't give you your sword back.
Yeah, exactly. What are you thinking? You've been reading some Republic? You thinking about swords? You've been reading book 1 of the Republic, Aaron? Do you talk to students? Is it okay if we wrap this up now?
Yeah, sure.
So there is no question in my mind that Fed 10 is a height of rhetorical acumen, and that rhetorical acumen in Fed 10 is deployed for the sake of the civic education that Publius is going to offer us. I'm not going to say too much because then I won't have anything to say by the time we get there. But I wonder, would it be in bad faith or with the trust that you have or that with which you're entrusted at your school is what I meant, to talk to students about lying? I mean, you and I haven't talked about lying. I don't know if we agree or disagree about the status of lying and whether lying is could possibly be well deployed, or if for you, Aaron, because I know you'd be a very nice guy, very good guy, whether you would think that lying is always bad, unjust. What's your opinion? May I ask? I mean, it's not like anybody's listening.
Well, as you know, rhetoric can be very helpful in the classroom if you're trying to convince students of something. It takes rhetoric to remind a student what rules are. So we have an honor code at school. It used to be, and this is actually the one that I deploy in the classroom now, it's as a student of the school that I attend. I have acted honorably on this assignment. It used to be as a gentleman. I acted honorably on this assignment. And I prefer the as a gentleman line because student means to make a mistake. So saying as a student I have acted honorably doesn't make sense to me. But as a gentleman I have acted honorably on this assignment makes sense to me because a gentleman does not act dishonorably. He may lie from time to time of necessity, but he won't act dishonorably. But that requires telling students that they are gentlemen. We address them when they're in assembly, gentlemen, even if that's an aspiration. We've talked about before, I think particularly in the context of paper number 2, that sometimes if you want something to come into existence, you have to pretend like it already exists. You have to talk about the Union as you dream it could be. You have to imagine your students as one day you dream they could be. Along this line, I remember having once a conversation with one of my colleagues who talks a lot more than I do about love in the classroom and how she loves her students and loves them in the way that she wants to see them succeed and believes they can. And I think there's a difference between loving something as it is and hoping to make it better and loving its potential, what it could be. So by telling them that they can hit a higher mark than they can, you might raise them to that expectations. And at the same time, lies are important not only in working with students, but also in encouraging students to work with themselves. Like whenever we do constructive criticism, peer review in class, you have to couch your criticism between 2 compliments.
Yeah, compliment sandwich.
Compliment sandwich. And even if a student doesn't mean it, it's necessary to grease the wheels and let criticism go through. And that's what the rhetoric here is, right? We are going to criticize your state governments, but we can't even stop complimenting them. They're so good.
The improvements are so good. And so therefore we have to admit as people who aspire to ourselves to be quality educators, that there's got to be some accommodations, and those accommodations require not speaking directly. They require indirect speech, and as such, you want me to say? Lying. Lying. Socrates says, forgive me, I can't recall where it is. I guess it's at around 504 of the Republic. We don't have the thrust to get to the good here. So I'll talk about a child of the good. At least he's frank in saying, hey, I'm not going to tell you my opinion of what the good is or the study of the idea of the good entails, but we can get to an image. And then so it's a matter of when you're trying to sell people on a mode of government, whether you tell them you're selling them an image of what's good, or you say, no, this is good. Because by this point, we've only looked at 2 paragraphs, but I'm thinking that this guy Publius in Fed 10 is about to tell me how I can have justice and stability in my political order, how it is that we can have public and personal liberty, how friends of popular government can have their way. Meanwhile, all of human history has shown that friends of popular government live short lives because popular governments live short lives. This is an aspirational paper, to be sure. Now let's see whether or not at the end of the paper we're convinced, now that we have our own hard-nosed realism front and center. Now, this is fun, man. Thanks so much for being so careful through these first couple of paragraphs with me. This was nice.
And we've talked often about, at this rate, we will get to paper 85 by, well, gosh, one paragraph, 2 paragraphs at a time. No longer 1 paper at a time, 2 paragraphs at a time. But we're convinced it's worth it. The question is anyone listening?
This has been the Good Government Podcast with Aaron Slutkin and Michael Hoffpauir.